The state of the state and the state of the Kasich campaign.
From the Battelle studio at WOSU at COSI, this is Columbus on the Record. Joining Mike Thompson this week, Andy Chow, State House reporter for Ohio Public Radio. Mark Niket, reporter for Bloomberg News. Terry Casey, Republican strategist, and Sandy Tice, Executive Director of Progress Ohio.
John Kasich's campaign for president is looking more and more like a third wheel. Once again, he finished a distant third to Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, this time in Wisconsin. Cruz captured 48% of the vote and 36 delegates. Donald Trump won 35% of the vote and 6 delegates. John Kasich finished third. His 14% did not net him any delegates. Mark Niket, you know, when the campaign moved down south, Kasich said, wait to the Midwest. And then when it moved to the Midwest and he lost in Illinois and Michigan, he said, well, we just want to get delegates. Well, now he's not even getting delegates. How long can he stay in this race?
Well, that's the question, and you're right. I mean, you would think that Wisconsin would have been a state that he could have done well in. And he didn't make any bones that he wasn't going to win Wisconsin, but he did compete hard. He thought he could win a couple congressional districts, particularly around the Madison area. In fact, there was polling before the election that showed him ahead there, and he ended up third in all the congressional districts. And more troubling, I think, for the campaign is his case going forward is that even if he can't get the majority of delegates before the convention, he's the most electable. He can beat Hillary Clinton. But even in the exit polls in Wisconsin, it showed that Ted Cruz was actually the choice of actual Republican voters about who they thought could beat Hillary Clinton. So he has to sort of, he's now moving on to New York, and he has to sort of really make a stand, you know, and be able to show that he can attract delegates for sure, and maybe even win one of these states that are coming up.
But the victory for Kasich was the fact that it's looking more and more likely that in July in Cleveland there is going to be a real convention and a real contest, and that allows him to be in the game. The fact that it's not getting locked up that soon as Trump had hoped.
The conversation I'm hearing is it's between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, and then they start talking about Paul Ryan rather than John Kasich. Is he still the odd man looking out?
Well, it's still uphill, but he's still on the field. And as I use the football analogy, if you're on the field, you might not be the first or second choice where the quarterback's going to throw you the ball. But if you're on the field, maybe you'll get the ball, maybe you'll run for a touchdown.
Like Mark was saying, Kasich has really great numbers polling against somebody like Hillary Clinton, and he does have high favorability ratings, but when you take that to the convention, you can say all those things, but when you also say he only won one primary state, I think that kind of does it for you.
Sandy.
If he doesn't win Pennsylvania, which is where he was born, he's got to get out. And what I think is annoying is the taxpayers of Ohio have spent over $500,000 already on his gallivanting across the nation running for president. We shouldn't be paying for that, and a good fiscal conservative like the governor should not ask us to.
You can
I'm
see the
glad
strategy.
you become a fiscal conservative.
I just want consistency, Terry.
You can see the strategy, though, because I think what the governor is looking ahead to is the idea that, you know, there might not be support for Trump to get the nomination. And what you saw in Wisconsin was not necessarily a pro-Cruz vote, but sort of this coalescing of Republican talk radio and other forces to stop Trump for Cruz. And I think Governor Kasich's idea is you get to a convention setting where delegates are picking, and maybe they're not enamored with either one. And if you're really looking for an alternative, at least, as Terry said, you're on the field.
But why didn't Wisconsin have the anti-Trump vote go to Kasich? It seems like Kasich would be more in line with, you know, an upper Midwest voting mentality than Ted Cruz.
But the establishment there, including their governor Scott Walker and others, viewed that Cruz had a better chance of stopping Trump. So their first goal was stop Trump, which they achieved to do. But the only problem now is obviously in New York, Cruz rolls in there, he goes to the Bronx and embarrasses himself. He's got his problems.
Well, Kasich now does turn his attention to New York, which holds its primary on April 19th, and it looks like John Kasich is turning his attention to Ted Cruz.
In Iowa, Ted Cruz sneered at our New York values.
You know, I think most people know exactly what New York values are. And I gotta say, they're not Iowa values and they're not New Hampshire values. Everyone knows what New York values are.
Ted Cruz divides to get a vote. John Kasich unites to get things done. Kasich delivered on his word and turned his state around with grit and determination, something New Yorkers should appreciate. John Kasich for president.
I'm John Kasich, and I approve this message.
Ann Kasich's unaffiliated Super PAC is running a remarkably similar ad.
New Yorkers aren't stupid, Ted. After we were hit, we rallied, rebuilt, but remembered. We tell it like it is, and that's who we are. So when you smear New York values in Iowa for votes, we remember that too. Now, you come here and conveniently say you love New York. Forget about it, Ted.
New Day Independent Media Committee, Inc. is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Forget about it, Terry. Why isn't he going after Donald Trump? Why isn't John Kasich taking on Donald Trump?
Well, because Kasich's actually running second in New York, and again, Cruz made some big mistakes, and when you have, and we wish we could have you showing the New York Daily News, the Post, I mean, those tabloid newspapers and the New York City media do a great job of exposing Ted Cruz for being too far right-wing.
Kasich is getting a lot of airtime in New York right now. It seems like a lot of the cable news networks are jumping on the different things. I don't know if you saw him down all that food at that deli, but I mean, he is getting a lot of airtime, whereas Cruz isn't. But Trump just has such a stronghold on that state that I think it's hard to see anybody else but Trump winning New York.
And Trump's almost been hiding in terms of very few public events because obviously his campaign, after 2 bad weeks, is in chaos, and they're now trying to totally disorganize with a new campaign manager.
We've also seen, though, in the course of the increased media attention, the increased scrutiny of Kasich's record. He has a terrible record as governor. He really didn't balance the budget. All of those stories that have come out that have checked his facts, I think, are exposing him for the fraud that he is, and I think that's hurting his cause, too.
Well, Mark, that's part of the factor that goes into these head-to-head polls with Hillary Clinton. Granted, it's only April, and these polls really are very questionable at this point, hypothetical matchups. But no one has really campaigned against John Kasich. Donald Trump did a little bit in Ohio before the Ohio primary, but that's it.
Right, and also when you look deeper into these polls too, you'll see that there's a high percentage of folks who don't have an opinion about Kasich. They don't know well enough. They don't know him well enough to form one. In fact, in Wisconsin, Kasich was even, commenting on the campaign trail that 38% of Wisconsin voters didn't know enough about him to have an opinion. So how can you be expected to win?
And that's where the money comes in, right, or lack thereof. Bernie Sanders has now won 6 straight Democratic contests in the race for his party's nomination. Hillary Clinton still has a huge lead in delegates, but Sanders is not going away anytime soon. This week, Clinton and Sanders spent a good amount of time debating each other's qualifications, or lack thereof, to be president.
Well, I think he hadn't done his homework, and he'd been talking for more than a year about doing things that he obviously hadn't really studied or understood.
Are you qualified to be president of the United States when you're raising millions of dollars from Wall Street, an entity whose greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior help destroy our economy?
Look, I don't know why he's saying that, but I will take Bernie Sanders over Donald Trump or Ted Cruz anytime.
Sandy Tyson, now there's an endorsement. Finally, Democrats are mixing it up. I mean, Bernie Sanders really didn't say anything different this week, except that he directly linked Hillary Clinton's name to Wall Street contributions. Before, he was just implying it.
Well, and he has since backtracked on his comments about her being unqualified and said, of course, she's qualified. So he's already walked that back. Hillary is still the front runner. She's still the presumptive nominee. Bernie has a very narrow path. He needs to win 56% of the remaining delegates to nose ahead of her. But I just like the fact that he's added to the debate. He's representing the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, brought a lot of young people in, and I think that's going to be helpful in the general election.
But the big number is 55, and I don't mean the speed limit on a lot of roads. It's 55% of the general population has a negative opinion of Hillary Clinton, and when you look at the polling, they don't trust her. So part of what Bernie is pointing out is she has a lot of baggage and a lot of problems, and that's one of the items of hope for Republicans and for Bernie.
Bernie can also be troubling to the campaign because unlike the other candidates in the past couple of presidential elections where, I just want to join just to keep the conversation going, Bernie's actually winning some of these states and pulling a lot of delegates. In the states that he's winning, he's getting a bigger gap of delegates than sometimes when Hillary wins a state, they're still basically splitting the delegates.
Give Bernie Sanders credit, Mark. He goes into New York and doesn't pander to Wall Street, to the banks, but is attacking Wall Street and big banks 10 days before the New York State primary wise?
Well, and that'll be the question. And New York will be pretty big for this race, I think, because you know, you've seen Bernie Sanders win, I think, 6 of the last 7 primaries and caucuses, but some of them were states where Hillary Clinton didn't even compete that hard. And in fact, Wisconsin, she, I think, campaigned there Tuesday or Wednesday and then left and went to New York. So if Bernie Sanders can close the gap in New York and be competitive in the delegate hunt there, at least it will show he has some momentum and a potential path, albeit narrow. But the problem that I think Bernie Sanders has overall is part of his rationale for getting the nomination is he's going to have to flip some of these superdelegates who are aligned with Secretary Clinton. And you know, these are party activists, party leaders who have been aligned with the Clintons forever, and Bernie Sanders hasn't even been a Democrat. So to me, that's going to be the harder hurdle for him, unless he can sort of build momentum, and New York will be the first test for that.
And also attacking Wall Street in New York might not help him in New York, but it only bolsters his support in other states going forward, too. Kind of like Ted Cruz can stick to his New York values comment and then take that to other states.
And Hillary can't hide that she won't reveal the speeches she got $250,000 each for. And we'd like to know, what kind of speech can you give that you can get $250,000 from Wall Street firms for?
Sandy, everyone says that by this unqualified remark on both sides is going to come back to haunt whoever is the nominee, that they'll be featured in negative ads. But isn't that par for the course for every primary leading up to an election?
Yes, it is. And this primary has been a little different. This is the first time we saw the direct attacks. What we've seen from the candidates and what we've seen generally from the party is, I am so glad as a Democrat my team is not fighting like the other team is, and I will support whoever gets the nominee. That's sort of new for us Democrats.
Well, it was pretty dirty in 2008 when Strickland was attacking Obama, et cetera. So there have been some bitterly divided Democrat primaries in the past. The question is, how well can they heal as they go into the fall?
We're feeling good about things.
Oh, you are.
John Kasich did take time off the campaign trail this week to focus on Ohio. He returned for his annual State of the State address. This year he took the speech down the Ohio River to Marietta, where he again tried to show his softer side, holding and kissing someone's baby before his speech. In his speech, Kasich touted his tax cuts, the state's job growth, and even promised more tax cuts.
But we're going to come with another comprehensive tax reform package early next year with more tax relief and reforms to better align our tax code with the way Ohio works in today's economy. And that fundamentally means lower income taxes. Okay?
Democrats say additional state tax cuts will only force local tax increases. Their view of the state shows Ohio's job growth and Ohio's wage growth average at best. Andy Chow, this State of the State seemed remarkably similar to last year's State of the State. Only a few less proposals on the table.
A few less proposals, a little bit of what we've heard for the past 6 years, throw in a tiny bit of what we've been hearing on the campaign trail, and it's basically what the speech was this time around. I think it was a little lackluster. There not really any explosive elements to it, but if you talk to some of the representatives, especially the Republican senators and representatives, they'll tell you that they kind of appreciated him not throwing any sort of presidential lingo or rhetoric into it, because they're saying, well, this is our joint conference session. We don't want this to be a platform for a presidential campaign. But there really wasn't anything too big to announce in the State of the State.
But there were some things. I was there in Marietta, and he cited Nina Turner and the work Ohio's done. Very bipartisan. Talked about shutting down some of the pill mills. There were a number of things where he reached out and gave some praise to Democrats.
That's called low-hanging fruit, no, Terry?
Well, but he's doing it.
But no fracking tax, no expansion of the sales tax, which has been in past State of the State addresses. How much did the presidential campaign influence his pulling back on those couple of things?
It's hard to say, but you know, part of it, there's been a lot of progress in Ohio. So people they've kind of gotten used to the lower unemployment, the fact that Ohio's not in dire financial circumstances. There's some other states like Illinois that hadn't even passed a budget yet, over 6 months in it, and there's other states that have huge pension problems.
Actually, Ohio has moved in a negative direction under John Kasich. 1 in 4 kids now lives in poverty. 1 in 4. We are had the third highest hunger problem in America behind Mississippi and Arkansas. We're the Mississippi of the North. what John Kasich has done to education. We went from number 5 when he took office to number 26, because what he's done is he's decimated the programs and the services for the cities and where the poor people live. And cutting taxes, cutting the income tax again for rich people is only going to make it worse. How many decades are we going to cut income taxes and wait for these jobs to fall from the sky?
Sandy, if it's so bad, why did Ed Fitzgerald only carry 2 of the 88 counties?
He was a terrible candidate.
Well, but he didn't have the issues.
Well, the unemployment rate has come down. There's folks say it started under Strickland, but it is down, at or below the national average, right at 5%, where it was at 8 or 9% when Kasich took office.
But when unemployment goes down and poverty goes up, you're creating the wrong kind of jobs, and that's what John Kasich has done.
It was interesting to me how much of a marriage this speech was between his presidential campaign and the traditional state of the state. I mean, there was, on one level, sort of intertwining of his stump speech and stuff that you would expect in a state of the state, but also thematically, I think he really was, for anybody who was watching outside Ohio with that lens of the presidential campaign in mind, trying to show that he's a uniter, not a divider, and trying to reinforce sort of the broad narrative that is part of his presidential campaign.
And not a lot of people didn't seem like they were out watching it from outside of Ohio. I was trying to check all the cable news networks, and barely anybody was covering it or carrying the signal.
Should he have held this is later than it usually is. Should he have held it? I mean, it would have been right in the middle of the big primaries in South Carolina if he held it in February like it normally has. Terry, any regrets that he didn't hold it earlier where he would have gotten maybe more attention?
Well, I don't think it really would have gotten that much more media attention, because the press, and they've got some things to answer for in how they've covered this campaign. They don't dig much into the substance of things, and I still think they wouldn't have really come to Ohio. They like low-hanging fruit, like for them being in New York, where they can cover candidates and what food you're eating or what local things you're visiting. The national media does like easy stuff where they don't have to think and work too hard.
Who's probably better off staying in those states and doing these town halls, which seem like those are the most effective use of his time right now.
And people like Darrell Rowland have told me that Kasich is really good at doing these town halls, that he likes that kind of program.
He used to do a town hall state of the state. Getting to some of the policy, in that soundbite we played, he did call for tax reform. And he said that would include tax increases, but usually, Mark, tax reform includes somebody else getting a higher tax rate, or maybe a tax loophole closing, so they have to pay more in taxes. What are the chances of that this year?
Yeah, you didn't hear any specifics, and I don't think they offered any afterwards, but I guess when I heard that, I was thinking something along the lines of what he offered in the budget process last year. That is higher consumption taxes, primarily sales tax, maybe another shot at the severance tax, all in the service of lowering the income tax.
But the biggest thing I heard him say was on the income tax cuts, not new ones, but merely moving up what's already scheduled.
There was 2. They were moving up and then additional ones as well.
And of the big things that he did kind of mention, which are these income tax cuts and then congressional redistricting, these were things that members of his own party in the General Assembly weren't so happy with either.
How about the fracking tax? I mean, that was big a couple of years ago, but now natural gas is down because the prices of oil and energy are so low. Andy, is the fracking tax going to go anywhere now if it didn't go anywhere before?
I don't think so. If we're going to see anything right now, we're going to see something where Republicans and Democrats come together to come up with some sort of tax reform that's implemented down the road, because even Democrats are saying that this is not the time to increase the tax on natural gas.
He did support, Sandy, the reform of congressional redistricting, which John Husted applauded, others not so much. What are the chances that happens?
Well, right now the big roadblock is the congressional delegation. Both sides of the aisle don't like it. If I made $175,000 a year and had great health benefits and a great pension, I might like the status quo too. But I was glad to see the governor come out for it. Every statewide elected official has come out for it. And we're going to, the team that got legislative redistricting passed is going to push for this.
But there was a Supreme Court ruling recently that maybe gives another way of looking at it, because there's been some legal things up in the air. An Arizona case that got decided, I think, a couple months ago, and then the one in the past week or two, but still.
That's the one that said that you should have to count population, not just registered voters.
Right, but it is bipartisan, whether it's Joyce Beatty, who loves her district and doesn't want a more competitive district, or Fudge in Cleveland, or Republicans.
Or Stivers in Columbus. And
there's a lot of people liking the status quo.
They all like it. I mean,
but it's bipartisan.
Yes, they all dislike it.
So is there any, I mean, he's the governor, he's got a bully pulpit. I mean, is he really going to push for this, Mark?
There's a lot of people in the legislature, by the way, who might want to run for a congressional seat, and they want to look out for their interests on both sides.
Yeah, I guess I'd be surprised if he pushed hard. I mean, he threw it out there, and might be something he supports, but it's got a long way to go.
Yeah. All right. Our last topic. There is no doubt the abuse of narcotic painkillers is a huge problem in Ohio. It often starts when someone gets hurt, becomes addicted to opioid painkillers, and then sometimes turns to heroin when the prescriptions run out or become too expensive. The Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation knows about the problem all too well. As reported in the Columbus Dispatch, more than 9,000 workers' comp claimants were taking enough painkillers to render them dependent on them. So the BWC put a cap on opioid prescriptions, and now it wants to put dosage guidelines into state law. Terry Casey, you can understand where they're coming from, but is there there's got to be a balance there between a government agency saying how much medication you can take?
Well, the BWC only deals with the people that they're paid for, which is a narrow portion. But the governor in the state did talk a lot about that Ohio has made some progress, and one of his Courage Award winners cited some people there that we've made some real progress because 4, 5, 10 years ago, we didn't realize the dependency, the things that could happen. And part of it is people either taking too many pills or people doing the doctor shopping and then getting extra pills and selling them. So I think in general, it's a good reform. And I did check with some BWC sources, and there is the capability, if you've got some patients that legitimately have a special circumstance, where they can kind of override or get some additional care if it's merited.
This has been on the BWC's radar for a really long time now. If you go to any of their board meetings, they talk about this all the time. They've had task forces on it, and they say, listen, you fall down as an employer or employee, you hurt your shoulder, and then there are doctors out there who just throw Vicodin at you right away without really giving it a second thought. And they're trying to change this systematic issue of people who just throw these powerful painkillers at you without really thinking about the long-term consequences.
Yeah, this was a tough issue because in a perfect world, you know, you could leave this decision to the doctor and the patient, act in the best interest of the patient. But as we know, it's not a perfect world. And as Terry said, you've been seeing, you know, cases where patients are doctor shopping or selling pills, whatnot. And you wouldn't want to see the state sort of involved in these kind of decisions. But on the other hand, something has to be done with the problem.
And there was some things proposed on pharmacies and people that work in pharmacies to tighten some things up there, because I think a lot of us thought pills are always the answer, but now we're realizing it can cause some serious problems.
Sandy, could you see this? This is workers' compensation. Could you see Medicaid, another government-run health insurance program, Medicare, starting to count your Vicodin pills and say, hey, you're taking too many?
That's what a lot of people are worried about. This is a terrible problem. It's a growing problem in Ohio. I don't know what the answer is. I'm glad we're having the conversation about it. I mean, I think it's nice, though, for a change that people aren't trying to just regulate my lady parts. You know, I mean.
Well, I mean, it goes to the health care. How involved should government be in actual doctor-patient decisions? And this, I mean, the dispatch reported 60 cases where they were taking 200 pills a day.
They could be taking 200.
Yeah, I mean, where they were getting prescribed 200 pills
a day. And they weren't
day.
all the painkillers, but that many pills. I mean, clearly we're now learning it's only a small portion, but whether it's medical people running pill mills, it's people abusing the system, that we've got to tighten it down and recognize that medicine, if you don't supervise it correctly, can really create some big problems.
How about are there any other law changes that are possible? You mentioned regulating pharmacies, tighter control, monitoring these
prescription guidelines. Yeah. There's a bill in the House right now that would require tamper-proof pills. There are these pills that are almost impossible to crunch down into powder. You saw them; they take a hammer and they crunch it down, and they can't. And that's something too, to require these pills to be prescribed.
All right, it is time now for our final off-the-record parting shots, and we will start with Sandy Tice.
Larry Sabato's crystal ball was the latest of the national political prognosticators to move the U.S. Senate race that features incumbent Republican Rob Portman against Democrat challenger Ted Strickland, move it from leans Republican to a toss-up. And I think what is helping that and is helping Ted is Rob Portman's ridiculous obstructionist position, saying that the president doesn't have the right to fill the Supreme Court vacancy even though there's a year left in his term. Polls show that is increasingly unpopular, and I think when the obituary on this race is written, this will be seen as one of Portman's big mistakes.
Sorry.
I'm going to be a little more tangible, bricks and mortar. Right here where we're at in the COSI studios at WOSU, I predict in the next year or two, we might be homeless from here, going back up to the campus, because I've heard that there's some exciting things they want to do to put in some of this COSI space that would have some national connections that I think could be very exciting.
Exciting things. Mark.
Governor Kasich has faced some do-or-die moments in his presidential campaign, primarily New Hampshire and Ohio, where he said if he didn't do well or win, he'd be out. Maybe it's not quite to that level coming up, but this is an important stretch for him with New York in 2 weeks, and then following that, 4 states, including Pennsylvania, where he has to start racking up some delegates and showing some strong seconds, or even winning some of these states.
Andy.
Let's go outside of Ohio to the southwest region. The Arizona State House of Representatives, the House Speaker, is now barring reporters from being on the House floor unless they subject themselves to a deep, serious background check.
What are they checking?
What's the risk?
Everything, drug tests, everything. And people, the AP is now declining to be a subject to these tests.
Oh, interesting. Wow. John Kasich, as we mentioned, did say that gerrymandering should be relegated to the dustbin of history. Well, that dustbin is 205 years old, so I predict it's going to make 215 to 225 more years before it's done with, in Ohio anyway. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online, Facebook, Twitter, our website, wosu.org. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.
In defense of gerrymandering, it comes up.